Hi students, welcome back to Sociology. As you can see, I still have this weird background situation going on, so we're just gonna roll with it. Today I'm gonna talk to you about what is sociology. So let's jump right into it. Let me share my screen so you don't have to look at this weird green screen for much longer. You can look at a PowerPoint. All right, this goes here. Let's get started. So I know that in this class, we have students ranging from freshmen to seniors, and some of you have maybe never even been introduced to the concept of sociology. So I wanted to take some time for students in both my classes, media and statistics, to inform you about sociology and what it is in a broad sense. So what the heck is sociology anyway? What does it even mean? In the simplest terms, sociology is the systematic study of human society using the scientific method. So it is not opinion, it is not the same as journalism, it is not the same as propaganda. Sociology is a science. But where are the lab coats if we're so much of a science, right? So social science methods are virtually indistinguishable from natural sciences like biology. We focus on observation, description of empirical phenomena, and hypothesis testing. So that's exactly how a natural science would also approach empirical reality. But social science conclusions tend to be less precise than natural science. So that's maybe the biggest difference. And why is that the case? Think about that. Maybe pause this video and consider why that might be the case. The answer is conscious beings are more unpredictable than something like cells. In other words, we study human structures, human behaviors, right? As sociologists, we study collective human patterns. And because people individually are conscious and they are unique and people have agency to some degree, it is difficult to map out the patterns as precisely as you would for cells or any chemistry, you know. In other words, there is more noise in sociological data because people are, again, less predictable than non-human objects. But the conclusions that we can draw and do draw are always based on empirical realities and consensus truths based on, again, observation, hypothesis testing, and other methods, all right? So to summarize, we are just as much as a science as any science that you imagine with lab coats. Our conclusions are just more malleable and broad because we're studying a group that is more unpredictable. All right. You might say this is pointless. We aren't like doctors. Sociologists are actually kind of like doctors of society. So during times of social and global crises, learning the science of society is as valuable as learning the science of medicine. No, it isn't, you might say. Well, 2020 is an unprecedented year of change, at least in my lifetime. And society is currently in the process of radical shifts and reorganization. Whether or not you may realize this, a lot of change is happening at the societal level currently. Society is reorganizing itself. So how do you know what kind of society you want to build without empirically understanding existing social structures and inequalities, right? So since change is happening, whether or not we get on board with it, we need to know what direction of change do we want. And in order to know that, we need to really understand the truth about what the world looks like in this particular moment. So sociology, or the scientific study of human society, could not be more relevant in this time. So I am really glad that you are enrolled in these courses, and I hope that together we can teach you a lot about the science of society this semester. And fine, tell us more. Now we're just going to talk about a little bit of a background information about sociology and some important prominent thinkers within this discipline, all right? So first, I like to start students out with the concept of the sociological imagination, which is the ability to see the relationship between individual experiences and larger society. So the ability to realize that our experiences to some degree reflect the broader societal structure within which we operate. So in that way, sociological imagination allows us to link personal experiences with social contexts. So it's kind of like living out your biography within a historical setting, which is kind of interesting right now, right? You can imagine 100 years from now, students reading history books about 2020, and you are going to be characters in that story, right? That's not a story about any one of us individually per se, even though all of us are deeply affected by these changes. It is the story of our collective experience and social reality in this time. So the sociological imagination helps us distinguish between or understand the relationship between personal troubles versus public issues, or things that affect individuals versus things that affect societies more broadly. All right, so how do we distinguish that? I'm going to use an example to help you understand that concept. So this is Gary. Gary is unemployed, unfortunately. Unemployment is a personal trouble that comes with financial consequences. If somebody is unemployed, they're liable to experiencing negative financial consequences such as homelessness or not being able to provide food for their family. And that is a experience or a problem that an individual, Gary in this case, will have as a consequence of unemployment. However, unemployment is a public issue that is affected by economic context. So for example, by a global pandemic and economic depression that we are in the middle of right now. There's been a rapid increase in rates of unemployment across this country and across other countries. I mean, throughout the world, there's been massive increase in unemployment rates because the pandemic changed the way society operates. And as a result, many people lost jobs. So that's not really their problem alone. It's a collective public problem, a public issue, right? So the sociological imagination is being able to contextualize Gary's unemployment within the social structure upon which unemployment occurs. Key point, personal troubles are public issues from a sociological perspective. So there's also, you can take this a little bit further and think about the global sociological imagination. And as I am from a developing country and I moved here only like 11 years ago, the global sociological imagination is something I personally really value and think is important, all right? So global sociological imagination is trying to understand our personal experiences as a part of a global society. So not just US society or not just your town or city, but as the world. So there are different trajectories that different nations face, and as a result of that, people that live within these nations have completely different experiences. You can think of countries as broadly categorized in three ways. We have high income countries like the United States, we have middle income countries like China, and we have low income countries like Nepal. Now, depending on which of these countries you're born in or live in, your perspectives, how you see the world, and your life chances, the outcomes of how well you fit into society, really depends on where you fall in this income category by country, right? So for me, I grew up in Nepal, I was born in Nepal, and the average person in Nepal does not experience the same privileges as I do, because at the age of 18, I left Nepal and came into a high income country where opportunities were much more pluralized. I had a lot more opportunities, whereas if I stayed in Nepal, even with all of my privileges, it would be much harder for me to experience the same sort of access to material resources. And that's through nobody's fault. It's just the way the social structure operates, right? It is not the result of any individual's wrongdoing, but rather collectively we've organized the globe in a way where there are serious negative consequences to being born in the wrong place, right? So that's something to think about. We also have the concept of social construction, which is very important and comes up quite frequently in sociology. What this concept is trying to tell us is much of what we experience and think is socially constructed or created by society. So, for example, the concepts of race, class, gender, ethnicity, masculinity, femininity, these concepts would not exist if society had not at some point assigned meaning to these concepts, if people had not assigned meanings to these concepts. These terms have no real meaning apart from the social meaning that people give in a society to confirm them. These concepts only exist because we brought them into existence by naming them, right? So where did this sociology come from? In the 19th century, there was a lot of social I can't say that word, upheaval, thank God. Okay, let's forget that that just happened. This English is still my second language. Okay, moving on. In the 19th century, it was a period of rapid urbanization and industrialization, which led to a lot of social problems that maybe didn't exist to the extent prior to that. So, for example, child labor, pollution, overcrowding, issues of sanitation, all of these problems started to emerge as there was increasing urbanization and industrialization. Um, and so sociologists or some scientists were like, wait, how and why is society changing? What are these patterns? And can we enumerate these patterns in an empirical and systematic way? Because the way these changes are happening, there has to be some form of empirical basis to that change. So those questions and those curiosities and those conditions led to the development of sociology and social science more broadly. Because once people were like, why is society changing the way it is? It led to wanting answers to sociological questions. All right. So what have sociologists discovered since the 19th century? All right. Well, a few different competing theories have emerged, of which conflict theory has been the most consistently supported by history, empirical data, and sociological methods. So in this course, I mean, in my media course, if you're in my stats course, we won't be dealing with theory in this fashion, but it's still helpful for you to know what sociology is. If you're in my media class, we will be focusing on conflict theory because that is the most empirically supported, and I wanted to give an overview of what that theory is. Conflict theory is a theory that society is a state of perpetual conflict because of competition for limited resources. So think about how I said, if I was born in Nepal, I was born in Nepal, sorry, and if I didn't leave Nepal, my opportunities would be fewer. But I come from a much more privileged grouping within Nepal. I come from an upper caste Hindu family, a Brahmin family. I'm not a Hindu, but my family is, and I come from a Brahmin family, which means I come with a set of privileges that are vastly more pronounced than the average person in Nepal. The average person in Nepal lives in the rural villages, does not have adequate access to running water and sanitation, let alone the opportunity to move across countries to one of the richest countries in the world, right? The very fact that I'm here teaching you means that I come with some privileges. The reason all of this is the case is that there are limited resources, and the way these resources are distributed in current society is via competition, so that some people get a lot and others get very few. And you can think of that at the country level. Some countries get a lot and some countries get very little. Nepal has very little disposable resources to distribute amongst its population compared to the United States. Now that happens at the country level, and then that happens within countries, right? It happens across countries. There's high and low income countries, and then within countries there are high and low income individuals and people. And if you are a poor person that was born poor in a low income country, then your life chances are severely limited. Your ability to access material resources are severely limited, completely at random, right? You don't choose where you're born. So conflict theory holds that social order is maintained by domination and power, because people feel like there's limited resources and they need to, make sure that those resources are held by the people that already hold them. They want to maintain their power and domination. So rich countries, the US wants to maintain its power over poor countries, and wealthy individuals want to maintain their power over poorer individuals by controlling the social order. All right, so according to conflict theory, those with wealth and power try to hold on to it by any means possible, chiefly by suppressing the poor and the powerless. And again, think about this as a difference between individuals as well as a difference between countries. Powerful and rich nations suppress powerless and poor nations, and powerful and rich individuals and groups suppress powerless and poor individuals and groups. So a basic premise to conflict theory is that individuals and groups within society will work to maximize their own benefits, and as a result of that, there will be constant conflict in society. All right, so here's some classical conflict theorists that gave birth to these ideas, and the first of them is Karl Marx, who is a classical sociological theorist. So Marx is a German economist who wrote the Communist Manifesto, which you might have heard of, and Capital, which is a 3-volume book about the nature of capital or money. So Marx says history is a continuous conflict between social classes. These social classes, the bourgeoisie, are the elite ruling classes, those who hold the most material power and resources, and the proletariat are the working classes who have the least amount of power and access to material resources. And you can again think about that as the richest people in the United States versus the poorest people in Nepal. So that is the true bourgeoisie and the true proletariat, right? So the bourgeoisie and the proletariat have a relationship based on the means of production. So the means of production are your factories, your apartment buildings, these properties that generate wealth. The bourgeoisie owns the means of production, and the proletariat works for the bourgeoisie so that the more bourgeoisie can accumulate more of the means of production, right? So class conflict, the conflict between bourgeoisie and proletariat over the means of production, is necessary for social change. And that's a central idea that Karl Marx proposes, that there needs to be conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat class over who gets to hold material resources, which currently the bourgeoisie does. In order for that to change and for everybody to have equitable access, there needs to be class conflict. And so this isn't just some ideological statement, it's based on historical analysis, right? Marx was looking at how we went from feudalism to capitalism, which is what we have right now, and the way it happened was the ruling class at the time, which were the feudalists, were subjected to conflict by the capitalists who challenged their power and dominance, right? So now we have the bourgeoisie class, the capitalist class, and we have the working class, which is the proletariat. And, you know, we already are seeing around the world these sorts of class conflicts begin to rise between these groups. Marx is obviously extremely critical of capitalism, and in this class, so are we. Even though we aren't going to be focusing on Marxist theories that much, we are going to be focusing on theories that critique capitalism and that are based on Marxist conflict theory. So Fisher in particular in Media and Society is going to be focused on critiques of capitalism based on predominantly issues of mental health and other ideas that we will come back to. So Marx is not value-free, even though, you know, his ideas are empirically supported and conflict theory is empirically supported. Marx, as an individual, was a social scientist and also a person that worked to inspire the working class to realize their alienation and gain class consciousness. So class consciousness is when the proletariat or the working class recognizes that they are collectively being disadvantaged by society as it is currently organized. And when they gain that consciousness, they begin to sort of fight back against this unequal system of exchange. All right. So another prominent conflict theorist, and the only other one we will go over in this class, is W.E.B. Du Bois for now. And this is a quote by Du Bois: to be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the very bottom of hardships. So what he's saying is that class isn't the only factor that matters. When you think about conflict in society, we have to think about it intersectionally. So the true proletariat within a nation like the United States is the poor Black person who is both subjected to oppression because of his or her or their class position and because of his or her or their race. So that's what Du Bois sort of adds, is this perspective that race is actually an equally central mechanism of conflict within society, especially US society. So Du Bois was an African-American or a Black sociologist, and he founded one of the first sociology departments in this country at Atlanta University. He wrote the book, The Philadelphia Negro Study, a social study in 1899, where he empirically analyzed a community wrestling with overwhelming social problems. And he discovered the ideas of double consciousness, which is the idea that identity conflict of being both Black and an American is something that African Americans grappled with when he was writing and even today. Du Bois also pointed out that although people in this country espouse such values as democracy, freedom, and equality, they also accept racism and group discrimination. Now this, again, Du Bois was writing until late 1800s, and doesn't this feel so true to our times today, right? Even though this country espouses values such as democracy, freedom, and equality, they also accept racism and group discrimination. I mean, we are in this country finally coming to grapple with the contradictions that exist that are between oppressed races and the law enforcement wings of the US capitalist imperialist what do I call it, empire, right? So we obviously were all witness to a few months ago a series of protests that erupted across the country because of these very contradictions that exist still today, that this country accepts disproportionate murder of people of color, especially Black and brown people. All right, so that's Du Bois. So these are the two main conflict theory figures, and I just want to summarize conflict theory for you. So the idea behind conflict theory is that groups in society are engaged in a continuous power struggle for control of scarce resources. Because the resources are scarce, people are continually struggling to control them. Conflict may take the form of politics, litigations, negotiations, wars, or discussions. These are all the various ways in which conflict may arise in society because of limited material resources. Conflict theorists examine exploitation, inequality, and oppression. Struggle between social classes, they think, is inevitable and the primary source of social change. And the fact that it's a primary source of social change is empirically demonstrated over and over again through history. Anytime you think about how social structures have changed, they have come after a period of social movements where people took to the streets to challenge existing social structures. Concepts like feminism and critical race theory also fall under conflict theory, and they think about how issues of gender and racial oppression fall into these categories of social inequality. Some of the key conflict theorists are Marx, C. Wright Mills, who came up with the sociological imagination that we started this lecture with, and W.E.B. Du Bois. All right. Very cool. So let's learn sociology together this semester. I want to end with this quote by another conflict theorist, Pierre Bourdieu. The function of sociology, as of every science, is to reveal that which is hidden. So I want you to chew on that for until our next video session. And with that, I will leave you for today.